Thanks very much. And if you're new to technology business research and what we do, I'm going to explain it very quickly. We analyze how technology companies make money. We look at their strategies and their performances. We look at their business models. We assess where they are relative to their peers and where they're going. And we start with the individual companies and build a picture of the larger market. And we publish our analysis monthly, quarterly, or semi-annually, depending on the format, but basically we publish relentlessly. So my practice area focuses on IT services, professional services, and digital transformation. Within that space, within that digital transformation space, we take a semi-annual look at what the IT services vendors and consultancies, management consultancies, have done to build and run innovation, what we call innovation and transformation centers, and I'll explain what that means in a few minutes. So I'm joined today by my colleagues Elitsa Bakalova, Lesiczka, and Boz Hristov, who will go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Elitsa Bakalova. I'm a senior analyst in the professional services team. I lead our IT services vendor benchmark, which is a quarterly publication that includes 30 vendors in the IT services space, and I am TBR's expert on IBM, Atos, and Capgemini.
I guess I'll go next. This is Boz Hristov, Principal Analyst on the Professional Services Practice, lead the research for digital transformation and global delivery and automation, as well as lead the research for Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, and Infosys. Kelly, over to you.
Thanks, Boz. I'm Lesiczka. I am a Senior Analyst on our Professional Services team, and I cover some of the IT services vendors. So I look at Fujitsu, TSystems, HCL, and Cisco. I also work in our management consulting research, and I cover a few of the vendors there. I take a look at EY, PwC, McKinsey, and BCG. Back to you, Patrick.
Thanks very much. So what are we going to cover today? So what are the new trends that have been pressuring innovation and transformation centers, and are those trends going to continue in 2022? And we'll look at what's changed since the last time we talked about the sort of the state of play of these. We're going to try something new today. We're going to have all of us jump into the year 2026 and look back and see what's changed, what's evolved. And then sprinkled throughout all this, we're going to have specific examples from the vendors that we cover. And you just heard my colleagues talk about the vendors they cover in particular. It really is the full range from strategy houses like McKinsey and BCG through the big four firms, the consulting-centric IT services vendors, the tech-centric vendors, the India-centric vendors. We've got it all covered. And as Haley mentioned at the beginning, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A widget. If it's about any one of those companies, we'll do our best to get to it. So now I want to tell you what, if you wander off and miss the rest of this, and I know I've done that on webinars where my mind wanders, so I want to put this out here right away. These are the three most important things to know right now about these innovation and transformation centers. First is that reduced travel, imperatives around decarbonization and sustainability, and these virtual sessions that we've all put up with for a year and a half now, these are not going to kill the physical centers, but we are going to see a return to the fragmentation across the space. With the centers, with each individual vendor centers being more dissimilar to their peers than they are alike. We saw a lot of the centers become very similar over the last couple of years. It's gonna fragment significantly going forward. Second, collaboration really means more co-branded, co-run, co-owned centers by the consultancies and the IT services vendors and their technology partners. As an example, McKinsey and AWS partner and open a new center in Stockholm. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm just saying that's the kind of thing we're going to see. And then the third thing would be industry specialization. It will become the most common defining characteristic of the new centers, with those new centers reflecting existing industry hubs. That's probably the least bold of the predictions here, but it is going to require, it may not be bold, it may not be super crazy and insightful, but it is going to require some large organizational changes, some business model changes on the part of the IT services vendors and the consultancies. So that's important to keep in mind as we go forward. So let's kind of set the stage here. What are we talking about? What are these innovation and transformation centers? They are client-centric, business problem-focused, an emphasis on technology as part of the solution. They are physical collaborative spaces. Are they delivery centers? Maybe to some degree. Are they showrooms? Or places to play with new tech? Maybe to some degree. Are they where clients bring the hardest business challenges? Yes, mostly. And we've been to all varieties and spoken at length with the people working at and leading these centers, plus their clients. And in doing that, we developed this taxonomy around the centers, and we continue to evaluate them with these specific characteristics. And I want to stress these are not metrics, they're characteristics. And you can see what they are on here: staffing, operations, location and footprint, how many centers, the physical size, the proximity, all that. Internal uses, we can go off on a long tangent about that. It's crazy important. Ecosystems, how do they play within the startup community, with academia, with industry-centric organizations? And then, of course, there's the kind of the true holy grail of the characteristics of these, and that's measuring success. Every single vendor has a different, every single consultancy and IT services vendor has a different way of measuring success of these centers, whether it's pull-through revenue, expanded footprint per client, on-site engagements per year, the impact on internal talent. And I want to be clear, we everyone on this call from TBR, we physically went to more than 2 or 3 dozen of these centers in the years leading up to the pandemic. And we haven't been to one since early 2020, except for last week. I went to Cleveland and saw a new center there, and I'll talk about that more in detail later. But other than last week, what we're talking about now and what we're seeing and analyzing is based on all the discussions we've been having with the consultancies, with the IT services vendors, with their customers, with the people running the centers and the people staffing the centers, and of course their technology partners as well. So let's talk about some of the trends that we're hearing and we're seeing. These are sort of we had in the invitation, so the dark clouds. What are the silver linings? Well, first let's talk about what those clouds are, and let's talk about all the reasons why vendors, now and in the next year would either stop or stall or just slow down investing in these centers. One is, they're expensive. Physical spaces. Everyone is reducing physical footprints. The pandemic also showed everything done at a center could be done virtually. Every single one of these centers pivoted to delivering virtually. And then sort of thinking more broadly, it's who really wants to travel so much and start to blow up their carbon footprint. We're all paying more attention to that now. And then what we're hearing, and particularly from the client side, is who has time for strategy, for the blue sky thinking stuff, when really it's about operations, it's efficiency, it's get through to the other side of this pandemic and continue to be a business. And then at the end of the day, there's still a very strong sentiment of why do these places really matter? Why do they matter to clients, and do they really get a return on the investment? I think all of these are valid and convincing, and I think there's no doubt that some of the IT services vendors and the consultancies that we cover are going to listen to these arguments. They're going to return to the days of a digital closet where innovation and transformation centers existed as a sales showcase and really nothing more. We think those vendors that do that are going to save money in the short term. And once again, we think on the other side of 2022, they're going to find themselves playing catch up, at the other side of 22 or even beyond that. So I want to unpack some of those slides, or some of those trends one by one, kind of talk through what's a right now thing and what's more of a lasting thing. So every company is downsizing their office footprints, and for good reasons. We're all finding new ways to work. It makes sense. But these particular spaces, and here what I mean are the dedicated physical centers that have typically stood alone or at least apart from vendors' traditional offices. They bring certain benefits by being physical spaces. For one, they demonstrate in a very tangible, you can see it, you can touch it way, the commitment that an IT services vendor or a consultancy is making to digital transformation, to innovation, to technology, to all that. The physical space reinforces the investment dollars, reinforces the message that the vendor has a stake in seeing its clients taking on digital transformation. And these spaces, they also often reinforce the message that the vendor itself has transformed. So they're no longer just an outsourced IT services vendor. They're no longer a hardware-centric IT services vendor. They're not, an audit. They're not just the big four, audit and tax, or they're not just pure strategy like a McKinsey or Bain. The physical center exudes, we're more than you thought we were. We can help you solve problems that you didn't even think you could bring to us. That's what the physical center does. Is that a good enough reason for the real estate investment, for the ongoing operational costs, the inevitable technology upgrades? Based on everything that we saw before the pandemic, yes. Those small innovation labs tucked into a corner did not move the needle, either for brand or for revenue. Standalone dedicated spaces did, and that's not going to change, even if the office real estate footprint for the rest of the vendor does change. So if you think about a traditional or a typical vendor, and if they reduce their office space by, they only need a third of it now because of hybrid work, because of remote working, because of the new working model. That doesn't mean that the innovation digital transformation spaces also shrink by 2/3. If anything, I think we'll see expansions where the vendors are going to realize all those seemingly tangential and sometimes only internal benefits of these centers are even more important when that traditional workforce is less frequently in the office and maybe more frequently at these centers. Okay, so every center had to go all virtual in the spring of 2020, and everyone tells us everything went smoothly and everyone adjusted and clients learned to love virtual sessions. But we all know innovation over a screen is tough. Innovation over a screen is maybe impossible. And the connections that lead to commitments that become relationships that can weather the quicksand that can trap any transformation, that's very hard to do over a screen. Those breakthrough ideas that come from gathering the right folks in a room, letting them chat, also hard to do over a screen. So yes, everything could be done virtually. But the critical success factors in innovation and transformation become exponentially harder to do when everything is virtual. So once the options to fully return to be fully in person, why choose to make things harder? Why strew landmines across your own path? It just doesn't make sense. I can go on great lengths on this. A lot of different tangents that start from this point. I just want to reinforce one really important thing. Some of the IT services vendors and the consultancies invested during the pandemic in understanding what worked fine virtually and what had to be done again in person. So delivering virtually, yes, everyone did that. Learning what worked well and what didn't work well in order to prepare for the post-pandemic world, not everybody did. So some lessons are going to be learned out of that some of the vendors are going to have an advantage. So how about carbon footprint? Let's think about that for a minute. That's another one of those dark clouds. Will we ever get back to clients flying 15 people from Hamburg, Germany to San Francisco for 2 days to talk about the future manufacturing? If the subject matter experts can stay home and engage with more clients, which we heard again and again and again, why would they fly anywhere? And so maybe more than any of these dark clouds, these trends, this is the one I think will have the most lasting dampening impact on innovation and transformation centers. As companies get more sophisticated at tracking their carbon footprints, they're going to start to balk at having to fly their C-suite or some dedicated team to a center, especially if it means leaving their home region. And this is pure speculation right now, but I think what some of the IT services vendors and consultancies will do is introduce really creative ways to offset the carbon costs associated with in-person gatherings at these centers. So maybe starting with engineering use cases that show how the transformations are going to have a decarbonization impact longer term, which offsets the near term to fly, a dozen people from Brazil to Ireland or whatever it is. So put a pin in this one. It's something we're going to come back to. It definitely is an area where I think we need to do more research on it. We will continue to talk to people across the whole spectrum about it. And then the last two trends that I mentioned, the last two dark clouds I mentioned at the beginning, essentially they go together because they're questioning what's the value from these centers. So over the years, in going to all these centers, we have heard two strands of the same what's the point argument. One of those comes from clients who basically say, yeah, we did a session in one of those centers. It was great. Can't remember what changes came from it. Not really sure it was valuable. It was just a showcase. The other perspective comes from inside the house with the professionals at the vendor saying, yeah, not sure what those are really for, or no, I've never used one, don't need it. Those sentiments reflect what I mentioned at the very beginning. how measuring success is wicked hard, especially when every player has a different measuring stick, and even more so when we're comparing technology-centric showcases with design thinking strategy hubs, with pilot to scale focused implementation accelerators, whatever. So uncertainty about value has always been there, and it's going to persist. Well, what I want to do here is echo what I said about the all virtual delivery during the pandemic. Some IT services vendors and consultancies, some not all, invested in understanding what does success look like for their clients staff, for their internal stakeholders. They invested in proselytizing the value of these centers internally, so everyone within the firm understood what they were getting out of it, even though it was now all virtual. They took on those been there, done that, and don't need it sentiments, and they developed responses that resonate now and will resonate even more so when we're back to in person as often as we want to be. Others didn't. You can guess what I think about who's going to do better in the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those, how to get over that, the value responses. I'll talk about those a little bit and what we expect in 2022 and beyond. First, I want to have some of my colleagues, Elitsa, Kelly, and Boz, talk about some vendor-specific examples and put a little depth and detail to the broad outlines I've given. So, Kelly, I think you're up first.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so looking a bit at some of the innovation centers and the way that they've changed, a lot of the technologies around them have kind of shifted to facilitate that remote engagement. But that being said, a lot of the vendors are still continuing to expand their network of spaces and continue to create that physical footprint as more of a regional hub. And an example I want to call out here was around EY. They opened an innovation center in Beijing. It was a wave space that's centered around 5G technologies. And EY continues to move along its transformation path as part of its investment in technology, which includes investing in alliance partners, so facilitating that ecosystem, continuing to develop talent, pursuing acquisitions, as well as that physical expansion piece. So adding this center in Beijing kind of gives them another space to focus around one piece of technology, so one piece of their plan, but also bringing together people in that region, but also allowing talent, clients from other areas to come together and kind of work around this. Ensuring that it can support adoption of the wider range of technologies, including 5G, creating a space to bring everyone together will help them better work through their client problems, as well as create use cases a little better than they would prior. It also helps them to better connect and maintain their relationships, both among their own talent as well as working externally with clients. It also extends EY's ability and reach to deliver on different transformation projects that use 5G, as they can bring together this ecosystem and better look to find ways to solve outcomes, as well as to just bring different value and connection to our client engagements. And Elitsa, would you like to talk about Atos?
Yes, thank you, Kelly. So another vendor that I want to talk about is Atos. And Atos has been opening innovation facilities that are very closely tied to specific areas of strategic expansion for the company. And my three examples are around decarbonization, artificial intelligence, and quantum and high-performance computing. So starting with decarbonization, in June, Atos launched the A20 offering that enables clients to develop climate change strategies, to set targets, to calculate emissions, and to integrate solutions such as digital twin, decarbonization level agreements, and low carbon data centers. So together with the A20 offering, Atos launched the Global Net Zero Transformation Center of Excellence. And this Center of Excellence comprises 9 hubs located in North America, Europe, and Asia, and will enable the delivery of the A-to-Z offering portfolio and support Atos' overall expansion in the decarbonization space. Users will gain access to decarbonization suite services and will be able to get to net zero carbon emissions using tools such as emissions calculators, and digital decarbonization assessment solutions from Atos. In the artificial intelligence space, Atos recently launched 6 new AI computer vision labs across the globe to help clients gain business outcomes through AI-enabled video and image analytics platform called the Atos Computer Vision Platform. This platform is highly scalable and combines Atos' consulting capabilities in the 6 labs with pre-trained and customizable AI models, also integrates software stack based on Ipsotech acquisition, which was completed this year in June, and also combines hardware products from Atos from the Bolsakwana line. And the third topic around quantum computing. So in April, Atos opened a new R&D lab in Paris to support its expansion around quantum computing, high-performance computing, AI, edge, and cybersecurity. With this, I want to turn it over to Boz for our next slide example.
Sure, thank you, Elitsa. Yeah, real quick, I want to touch base on Accenture here as well. One example that stood out for me was the recent opening of Accenture Interactive's Droga 5 unit. They opened a studio, announced opening a studio in Japan, and they're looking to expand into China and Brazil. And for many of you that know Accenture or follow Accenture, you know that they certainly are not shy of expanding, acquiring, investing in resources. But the thing for what to highlight here was the fact that they're pushing into Japan. And certainly Japan has been a high growth market for Accenture in terms of overall the last 5+ years. They've been driving double-digit revenue growth in constant currency. And largely in terms of opportunities have been around the BPO area, along with some of the technology areas that they typically do work around. But what we see the connection here in the works on the design in the BPO and operations, we see that Accenture Interactive and using some of the capabilities that come from Droga 5 in terms of the connecting piece, connecting tissue with the marketing BPO, essentially, especially as we think and look into what are some of the content development, content moderation, content management services that might go along with it. The other piece of this center is that this center kind of highlights and solidifies the Accenture approach, where it begins to kind of bring together consulting, technology, and operation personnel together from the get-go of the engagement, as Accenture really responds to the demand of seeing buyers looking for not just the art of the possible, but really looking for more of a tangible discussions and tangible solution offering, as well as increased stickiness for many services along the way. Additionally, Accenture's ability to pool those resources and capabilities between the technology and innovation studios managed through the Accenture strategy and consulting unit through their global innovation practice enables it to drive some more of a targeted industry and cross-industry aligned discussions. So that's kind of like some of the thinking around how can we manage multidisciplinary resources, how can we bring innovation at scale. A lot of that is being backed by a rigorous research that Accenture does through its the DOC facility out of Ireland. So there's a lot of that backs up those opportunities. So in a nutshell, the facility that they open, it's much of the continuation of the Accenture has been doing, but I think it's also looking for the last several years to Accenture Interactive and innovation hubs around the world. But I think it's also specific to that geography and specific to kind of that extending beyond the technology integration, but looking into operation and many services that we see the CMO buyers start to think a little bit more aggressively and investing in that area, and Accenture being in the forefront to capitalize on that. Without turning over back to Patrick.
Thank you, Kelly, Elitsa, Boz, and we will come back to some more vendor-specific examples in a few minutes. But before that, I want to check in on what we said previously. So this is going back 6, maybe 9 months now, to the last time we did a webinar, and we had 3 key takeaways. We said talent is everything. In consulting and IT services, even in just tech, people drive results. You don't have the right people, you don't get the right results. Pretty straightforward. We also talked about partnering changing, driven in part by the technology vendors themselves, but also by the consultancies and how they were delivering value out of these centers. And then we talked about how the centers themselves were having a positive viral impact, if you're allowed to still say positive viral impact, on the firms themselves and how that's happening and what's coming next. So what's changed in the last little less than a year? I think talent remains at the core of all this. We were working on our predictions for 2022, and one of my colleagues said that talent is the parent of all the drivers creating and accelerating trends in IT services. And I think that's 100% correct. And for these centers, finding and retaining and training and exponentializing talent is fundamental to success. And by exponentializing, what I mean is taking the talent, making sure that the talent in one center is informing and influencing and mentoring and uplifting the talent in the other centers. That's one of the most important lessons that came out of the early versions of these and the early years of these. Partnering, I'll get to that in a few minutes. Finally, that transformation of the vendors themselves. We may have plateaued with this one. I think at least until the laggards in this space begin to recognize who they are and begin to reinvest in innovation and reinvest in physical centers that can help transform themselves and transform their clients. I think we've done all the internal transformation that's going to happen, at least initially, or it's sort of plateaued for now. I think we'll start to see some change once people start to sort themselves out. Again, so let's hear from my colleagues, again, with some vendor-specific examples that are either going to reinforce what I just said, or they're going to stand out as kind of outliers to those trends. So, Kelly, I think you're up first again.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. So an example I wanted to call it here was around HCL. And HCL had launched, I believe it was a month or so ago, a Cisco ecosystem unit. And the goal of this was to help support them around their cloud innovations. And so HCL and Cisco had worked together previously, and HCL had recently reinvented their cloud strategy, and they had established a cloud smart strategy to go forth and kind of innovate and expand around their cloud portfolio. Launching this unit kind of shifts HCL's approach to innovation and expansion. It has launched these units for Microsoft and Google Cloud, but not necessarily with their IP partners. So previously, HCL had really focused on their IP partnerships. One of the key ones was around IBM, and following that IP partnership, they had purchased some of those software products that helped them get their foot in the door around products, around software. So it signals a bit of a shift in the company's approach to IP development, kind of creating this unit to help them with cloud, to help them move forward around these different solutions, and expanding its pre-existing partnership with Cisco by launching this ecosystem will help HCL to better develop in-house staff that can effectively drive and direct these innovation efforts. It also will help support its growth around cloud, so deepening its ability to migrate, manage, and kind of implement. And creating it in its own unit, I think, will help them to better fine-tune and create what direction and direct where it wants to move. The establishment will also help to solidify HCL's strategy by developing scale to help back its cloud expansion and its software adoption, especially as it shifts to more of those as-a-service models. I want to hand it over to Elitsa for another example.
Thank you, Kelly. And I want to draw your attention to IBM. So, and kind of tie it in with the partnering trend that Patrick was talking about. So IBM overall has been, over the past year, become more open to expanding its partner ecosystem, and it's investing $1 billion in this initiative. And we're seeing increased activities around developing solutions together with IT services partners. So across the board on the IT services and systems integrator space, and also examples with the big four companies. But in terms of the collaboration space development, very recently IBM, together with Atos, announced that they are creating an Atos Cloud Center of Excellence that will modernize and migrate workloads to the IBM Cloud for financial services. So here we see a collaboration with industry specialized offerings. So the center will improve our Atos' ability to modernize customers' mission-critical workloads and migrate them to the IBM cloud for financial services solutions, reducing security risks and also ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements. Providing technology and financial services experts and dedicated professionals trained on IBM Cloud and Red Hat OpenShift helps the partners drive business-aligned outcomes through technology-enabled solutions. The partnership and the Center of Excellence also supports adoption of IBM Cloud services and improves IBM's ability to drive its strategy around growing in hybrid cloud and artificial intelligence. Again, around IBM, with an industry-specific view, IBM has been expanding constantly the IBM Garage network. In October, IBM opened a new IBM Garage in Alabama, a location that's designed specifically to support the federal government around digital transformation and modernization. So effectively, IBM is enhancing its value proposition by offering government-grade cloud environments, cleared local resources that are trained on the IBM Garage principles and methodology, thought leaders as well, and provide services in a hybrid cloud model. And now on to Boz.
Thank you, Elitsa. Real quick here on KPMG. Certainly KPMG has its own fair share of innovation centers. They call them ignition centers. We'll provide an update in the upcoming innovation transformation market landscape. But here, for the purpose of the webinar, I want to highlight a discussion we had with KPMG executives around the Johan Cruyff Arena out in Amsterdam earlier this year. And what stood out for us as part of the conversation about the Johan Cruyff Arena was KPMG involvement, but also the collaboration with the broader ecosystem. So there's three things I want to highlight here. First, the Arena's innovation team works with its external clients on a subscription basis, which is a business model that's rarely deployed by the consultancies and IT services vendors. The Arena's clients, which include startups and enterprise buyers, testing new technology and means to enhancing customer experience, have to fully trust the Arena's innovation team to deliver the value of those investments to pay for those on subscription base. So it's certainly of a new model. They're testing it, but they're also deploying it, which is something to pay attention to. The second key element that stood out for us in terms of that center specifically is that the Johan Cruyff Arena serves as a test bed in multiple ways, benefiting the Arena's clients, the startups, and the Arena staff. As I mentioned, startups, they not only test their technology solutions in the real-world environment with continuous access to all variables found, but they also, KPMG's executives know that the startups also pitch the solutions to internal operation professionals at the Arena. So there's testing and pitching on the startup side. And the third, which is really something that I want to kind of bring back to the discussion on the partner ecosystem, is the KPMG teams goes beyond the Arena to collaborate on innovation solutions with technology partners, most notably Microsoft in that case here in that specific center, the city of Amsterdam, and as well as arenas around the world. Not in the U.S. yet, but certainly others around the world. So the way we look into that part, specific last part, is that last part resonates very much to the characteristics we have previously discussed in the context of the maritime ports. And I know, Patrick, that's a topic Patrick can talk in length about it. But it's really about the Arena is both a contained ecosystem during most of the week and a massively complex and a wide open ecosystem during the match days or special events, so that the Arena can simulate on real-world participants with actual solutions, situations, and challenges faced of all kinds of the ecosystem, including the smart city. So in our view, an Arena with a proper innovation team and willing to and able to partner creatively across a wide ecosystem can certainly be the ultimate innovation transformation center. So KPMG is after something, no doubt, with that Arena. It's a matter that they can replicate at scale and managing also those partner ecosystems will be key. And with that, we'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you. 2 quick points. One, I was into ports before this whole supply chain issue, and everybody got into ports. And 2, it's kind of funny, the special report that we did on KPMG and the arena in Amsterdam, one of the most frequent comments we got about it is how our picture that we used for it wasn't the right arena. The content was great, the analysis was fantastic, but we got the picture wrong. Anyway, a quick time check. We've got about 23 minutes left in this webinar, and we've got about 3 slides left. We've got a few questions that have come in already. One, a great one about the sales process that I definitely want to get to, but if you have other questions, we will go through these next few slides quick enough to answer them at the end. So, all right, like I mentioned before, we're going to step in the future. We're going to skip all the way up to October 27th, 2026. What is it that we're going to be saying about these innovation and transformation centers then? A few things. First, we're going to say that the trend around co-branded centers, that where an IT services vendor or consultancy jointly owns and operates a center with a technology vendor, a trend that started in 2021, became an avalanche in 2022 and 2023, and it's now the de facto innovation and transformation center model. It's co-branded, co-owned, co-operated. I mentioned last week I'd gone to Cleveland. I attended the ribbon cutting for EY's new Wavespace and Innovation Hub with a firm called Nottingham Spurk in Cleveland. What was a lot of things notable about it, the thing that is important now with respect to partners, with respect to technology partners, was how many of their technology partners were front and center throughout the entire event, to the point where many of the EY professionals talked as much about what those partners were doing there as they did about what EY was doing. It's a huge shift from what we've seen previously at centers, where the partners are often kept off to the side if they're there at all. This was very different, and what we see coming is something that we've been advocating for and suggesting for a long time, which is more of this co-branded, co-owned, co-operated kind of approach, mostly because it's the best thing possible for the clients. All right, second, when we look back from 2026, I think we're going to point to the many industry-specific innovation and transformation centers that exist, and we'll describe how there was a pendulum. It started with, when these centers first got going, it was very industry agnostic. Any industry could come to any center, and then it moved to what we think is happening now, is a greater emphasis on industry-dedicated innovation and transformation centers. And so now by 2026, the full landscape is going to have the whole mix of everything, with the leading vendors are going to operate multiple centers for the same industry at different regional hubs for that industry around the world. So let's stick with EY, for example. They might have a new manufacturing-centric Wavespace in Munich, Germany, or Osaka, Japan. To be very clear, that's highly speculative. I don't have any direct knowledge of where they're going to be building Wavespaces. I'm just saying that's what it's going to look like in 2026. These industry-specific innovation and transformation centers as a part of the, as one of the many stars in a constellation of innovation and transformation centers, some industry-specific, some not. So then the third thing I think we're going to see after all these years is that the core characteristics, the strengths of these centers remain that clients want in-person experiences. They want to be close to home, but they want to be out of the office. They want people who understand their culture and their business problems and their market. And then in addition to what the clients want, the talent wants to work on these creative engagements in very cool environments. We've been talking for 7-8 years now about funky chairs and how having the right funky chairs in the center makes all the difference. That's not going away. That's sort of the overall picture we see in 2026. The centers are co-branded with their technology partners. Many of the centers are now industry-centric, and that physical first, being in person, because being in person drives innovation and provides that relationship glue that's necessary for transformation. All those things are going to be true in 2026. So again, one more time, let's hear from Elitsa, Kelly, and Boz on some vendor-specific examples and some speculation from them on where they think those vendors are going. I think, Elitsa, you're up first this time.
Yeah, so wanted to point out an example about Atos again. So Atos constantly enhances and modernizes its global network of business technology innovation centers. And as a result of the pandemic, and also to support its industry-aligned go-to-market approach, Atos launched the Atos Smart Manufacturing Studio very recently, which is a virtualized innovation facility. So during the past year, Atos worked in converting all the co-innovation content into a virtual format, so the company could work with manufacturing clients during the challenging times that were driven by the pandemic over the past year. The company adjusted delivery models, all the tools that are used, and the duration of the session so that they can fit into the new virtual model. And Atos is currently scaling the Smart Studio across other industries aside from manufacturing, and is applying effectively an innovation center in a box approach. So taking that model from the Smart Manufacturing Studio and using content that is easy to shift into a virtual format and is easy to automate and scale without too much effort, and applying it to other industry verticals that it works in. So going forward, I think the virtual format will not disappear, it will stay. And Atos will likely employ a hybrid approach to joint innovation with clients, effectively integrating virtualized and in-person collaborations. As clients and vendors strictly monitor business travel and real estate usage due to the increased interest and strategies around decarbonization, which Patrick talked about earlier, having this flexible approach to delivering co-innovation with a hybrid model will be a very important factor, and I think Atos will stick to it. Boz, on to you.
Thank you, Lisa. So for Infosys Digital Innovation Studios of 2026, there's three things that we are considering or speculating around. There will be on-client sites, and maybe that's not new, but on-client sites and thinking about how they've been using rebadging sales tactics will evolve into the need for constant innovation, and Infosys will begin to embed multidisciplinary and innovation staff into the product lifecycle development to ensure that stickiness. So we're not just in the forefront and kind of use the rebadging to guide the delivery, but also for the innovation purposes. Second, Infosys partner-ready centers will involve more than just technology, but also consulting. The company knows where its strengths and gaps are, and developing three-way partnerships could certainly out-advise, out-tech, and out-deliver rivals like Accenture. The current engagement with Daimler will help build the use cases of managing partner ecosystem at scale. The company is managing over 100 suppliers as part of the contract. And thirdly, Infosys will use some of these centers to sell and hubs to sell software and platforms. Kind of a left field idea here a little bit, because we know Infosys tried to do that in the past, but they were trying to embed that and permeate as a culture change across the organization. And we believe that they would have learned some of those missteps, and investing in dedicated facilities will more box in the opportunities, but also provide a test bed for a platform with minimal risk exposure, so more of a showcases to sell software. So those are kind of the three pieces for Infosys. I'm not sure if Kelly had something to add on TSystems, so I want to move on to Patrick for the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Boz. I just want to quickly touch on TSystems for a minute. Back during a few months ago, or I think it was early in 2021, TSystems had a virtual innovation center showcase. They had a little event. It was probably like an hour and a half, in which they invited attendees to participate. And one of the interesting things that they did through the event was they used avatars. So some of the attendees could actually be avatars, and I was selected to participate in one. And it was just a very different way to experience the center virtually. Using the avatars, you could actually walk around the center. You could interact with solutions they had set up. They had a few different IoT solutions that you could interact with. You could see how they were working. So you could walk around, you could talk to people, and it was just a good way to allow clients, and in our case, on our side, to look at the center, to actually explore the virtual center and be able to interact with it and see other people. And so the setup was very beneficial for remote interaction, particularly for them. It's something that they could use for remote engagements to help facilitate discussions, as well as easily show clients solutions. I think that's something that was kind of the approach to showing clients how they could use different technologies to kind of immerse them in that. It was hindered during the pandemic as they couldn't physically see it, but using the center and using the avatars, the clients can actually interact with the different solutions and see how they work, what they can do. Looking over the next 2 years, this type of engagement and this type of interaction will actually be very useful for TSystems, as it brings together a variety of its different technologies, solutions, as well as industry leaders. Where they're very heavily based in Germany, it also will help them to kind of show clients outside of the region who aren't as familiar with TSystems, or they just haven't worked with them in the past. It can help them to show the different types of expertise they have, the different types of solutions, and help them bring those clients and leaders together to help guide through different discussions and help to create those insightful conversations for them. Patrick, back to you.
Excellent, thank you. So in putting this presentation together, got to this point and realized it was a little unfair because talked about some current trends and then jumped into 5 years in the future. So I want to talk a little bit about near-term impacts in 2022. So what's coming up? What's coming up real fast, real soon? First, it's getting clients back into centers for physical in-person engagements. That will be the highest priority for most of the IT services vendors and the consultancies in 2022. And that's not just a direct result of the experience everyone has had being behind screens for too long, but it really underscores the importance that the physical centers have in taking clients out of their offices, away from their email, away from their desks, away from their distracting colleagues, into a physical space where they can think differently. This element of the centers was critical before the pandemic, and it's going to be absolutely critical to how success actually comes about in these centers going forward. Yes, we all learn to live with virtual. It's hard for me to even say, but we all know that the innovation cannot really truly happen over a screen. So reduced office footprints, reduced office real estate, emphasis on decarbonization, willingness to be remote, all that are going to push or seemingly push on the opportunities to reopen centers at the full sort of 2019 capacity. But what we see in 2022 is a return to the imperative to get clients into the physical centers, meet face-to-face, doing those kinds of transformative, innovative engagements that were critical pre-pandemic and are going to continue to be critical. And I can go on a whole tangent here about internal staff and the opportunities that these centers have for internal uses, but we'll save that for questions if you have them. Bottom line, internal use cases also going to be important in 2022. A second trend that we're going to see is that continuation of the push towards better definition around the value. As I mentioned before, some of the vendors spent time during the pandemic overcoming those objections of, yeah, we've done that, or yeah, I don't see the value. Some of those arguments that have worked to overcome those objections have been now and are going to continue to be in 2022, first showing an accelerated path to scale. If too many of the engagements pre-pandemic kind of wandered off on the art of the possible, we think many more engagements in 2022 are going to start with what does getting to scale mean and how do we go there now? Like how do we go fast? Related to this, we're going to see vendors start to focus on overcoming that stagnation that threatens nearly every transformation engagement, where the pilot products die from a lack of commitment or too much risk aversion, where IT services vendors and consultancies are saying, yeah, you did a design thinking workshop before and then it stalled after the pilot. They've got to instead present exactly how they're going to do things differently. What is the commitment to, again, an accelerated path to scale? And then underlying both of these is something really basic, and that's pointing out to clients how rapidly they were able to pivot and adjust and change and adapt during the pandemic. And I want to say that again because it's super important. The IT services vendors and consultancies that can point out to their clients how rapidly they, the clients, pivoted, adjusted, changed, adapted during the pandemic, and then lay out for them, here's how you can continue that rapid pivoting, adjusting, changing, adapting post-pandemic, with, of course, with help from the consultancies and the IT services vendors. It's that simple recognition that you, the client, didn't get as much value previously because you didn't realize how fast you, the client, could change. Now you do, so now let's go get after it. That point I believe in, but Boz has a counterpoint here, so let's hear it from Boz real quick. Go ahead, Boz.
Yeah, real quick on that last point. I think it's also about your previous point about scale and building use cases. I think it's important to think about how those vendors also evolve their value proposition along the way. I kind of hinted with some of the Infosys 2026 opportunity that might be laying in front of them, because I think that, and I haven't seen anyone doing it yet today, is where vendors starting to embed innovation, skilled personnel at the end of each milestone of a project, and really trying to continue the discussion of innovation and continue to hold like innovation workshops every time when a project reaches a milestone. So it's not just the innovation folks are up front and they toss it over to delivery and then they move on to another innovation workshops. There's actually a continuation of that, and it's like innovation at scale, innovation at as a continuation of the discussion, because I think that would also create a lot more of the value, and that will help a lot more of the scale, and kind of really truly think about what is the value of those centers, and not just for the front-end business development activities that usually they've been associated with. Something to look forward to, but it's not nobody has done it yet, but certainly something that we are keeping an eye out for.
And something we will feed into our research going forward. As we mentioned before, this is a semi-annual publication by us around these innovation and transformation centers. So, which means Boz and I have 6 months more to argue about this. One last point before we tackle some of the questions that have come in, and that's that you see on here the learning the secret to making these centers special. So, in our opinion, and this is based on our interactions with the vendors that we cover, that you've heard a lot about throughout the course of this webinar, our experiences traveling to these centers, talking with the professionals who run them, with the clients who work with them there. If there's any secret to making these places work, it's having an evangelist or a team of high priests, I don't know a better term for it, some person or group of people who can carry the message of the value that these centers deliver and carry that message internally. So they're drawing the best talent and they're sustaining the investment. They're continuing to make the argument for why these places are worth investing in. And they convince their colleagues to bring in the best clients with the hardest problems. And then they also, these high priests, evangelists, whatever, these very passionate people carry that message externally and beyond just the clients, but also to the entire ecosystem. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The passionate, empowered people for these centers are what separate really the leaders from the rest of the pack. Okay, so let's wrap up here. I mentioned at the start, we do have monthly, quarterly, semi-annual reports across the IT services, professional services, and digital transformation spectrum. Here you can see what we're doing in digital transformation. Boz, anything you want to highlight here before we jump to the next?
Yeah, as you have put here, Innovation Transformation Center is something that, it's part of that portfolio, but we are working on to publish a blockchain market landscape towards the end of this week, and we're going to have a view of voice of the customer coming up in November. So we're doing our annual survey of enterprise buyers, understanding how their attributes for vendor selection and needs and budget spends are evolving and changing. So look up for that piece of research around Thanksgiving, and then by the time we wrap up the year, we're going to have another round of industrial IoT market landscape that I'm collaborating with my colleague Evan Woolacott as well.
Excellent. Yeah, and the voice of the customer, I think, is the most read piece of research out of digital transformation, because, I mean, everybody's got customers. Everybody wants to hear it. And so then on the next slide, we're looking at our quarterly coverage in the IT services space. For For many of these vendors that you can see here, we also publish standalone vendor reports going into detail on their strategies and performance, exactly what I mentioned at the very top of this hour. Elitsa, anything else you want to mention here on IT services?
Yes, I wanted to add that we are enhancing our IT services vendor benchmark, and we started adding industry deep dives and geo deep dives. We alternate every quarter. So in 1Q21, we published a deep dive on industrial solutions and manufacturing sector. In 2Q21, we did a deep dive on the Asia Pacific region. And in 3Q21, we have selected the financial services industry as a focus for our deep dive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we're going to we have just a couple minutes. We'll take a couple questions. There's one that came in, and here you have all our contact information. So feel free to reach out to us for any kind of follow-up. We mentioned some special reports that are out there, some that are coming. We mentioned the Innovation and Transformation Centers Market Landscape, which the next one will publish in November, so reach out for that. But one of the questions that came in is interested in how firms are using these centers as part of the sales process, creating and capturing service opportunities. I'll go first on this, and then we'll hear from the rest of the team. The big story is that these centers were created initially to retain clients. That's what they were all about. It wasn't about new clients. It was retaining existing clients. At the time, there was, that was the biggest fear that was out there. Very rapidly, that shifted to how do we bring the salespeople in? What is the salesperson role? How do they bring in the most important clients, the best clients? Initially, there were some firms that looked at how do we get every single one of our top, 150 clients to a center. It was extremely sales driven, and also the flip side of that, or complement to that, sales measured. Everything was about what sales have come through. That shifted, and the recognition that the partners were an important part, the technology partners were an important part of it, that the internal capability building was important, the internal talent building was important, and sort of back to that full relationship of understanding it wasn't just about new sales, it was about really retaining those existing clients and doing more with those existing clients. By creating and capturing opportunities with existing clients, yes. Creating and capturing new opportunities, definitely secondary to the opportunities that you're working on with your existing clients, and that's in part because of how much work has to go into preparing a client for one of these sessions. Another tangent that we can go into great detail on. Elitsa or Boz or Kelly, anything you want to add on that particular question? Probably the wrong way to do that. Boz, anything you want to add?
Sure. Yeah, real quick. I think a good example here is Accenture, a vendor that, certainly, as I spoke earlier, has a vast, network of centers, of physical centers, but they also be able to retool and how they apply all those approach from the sales processing standpoint in their virtual environment. So they still rely a lot on those established frameworks from performing workshops, due diligence, to conducting 1 to 2 to 3 day workshops, depending on the client. To interact with the clients now virtually or in a hybrid format. They have also the center dedicated resources that were previously identified by the account lead, including the SMEs that conduct the workshops, which they also again follow the framework from design thinking through proof of concepts, prototyping, and proposal solutioning. And all that wrapped again largely to expand wallet share with existing clients. There's certain opportunities to go after new logos, following a similar process, but then still there's some internal collaboration, iron out the staffing and the outcomes and the monetization of the engagement that goes beyond. And certainly, obviously, in some cases varies by the threshold of the account, the threshold of the opportunity, the threshold of the industry or across industry frameworks that can be applied.
Excellent. And we are over time. I'm gonna cut off Elitsa and Kelly. Unfortunately, we're past the hour. Thank you all for attending. Haley, any other last messages we need to say?
No, I think we're all good.
Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you for the next one.